In November 2008, a man named Satoshi Nakamoto posted a research paper to an obscure cryptography listserv describing his design for a new digital currency that he called Bitcoin. None of the list's veterans had heard of him, and what little information could be gleaned was murky and contradictory. In an online profile, he said he lived in Japan. His email address was from a free German service. Google searches for his name turned up no relevant information. It was clearly a pseudonym. But while Nakamoto himself may have been a puzzle, his creation cracked a problem that had stumped cryptographers for decades. The idea of digital money, convenient and untraceable, liberated from the oversight of governments and banks, had been a hot topic since the birth of the internet. Cypherpunks, the 1990s movement of libertarian cryptographers, dedicated themselves to the project. Yet every effort to create virtual cash had foundered. Ecash, an anonymous system launched in the early 1990s by cryptographer David Chaum, failed in part because it depended on the existing infrastructures of government and credit card companies. Other proposals follow BitGold, RPOW, B-Money, but none got off the ground. One of the core challenges of designing a digital currency involves something called the double spending problem. If a digital dollar is just information, free from the corporeal strictures of paper and metal, what's to prevent people from copying and pasting it as easily as a chunk of text, spending it as many times as they want? The conventional answer involved using a central clearinghouse to keep a real-time ledger of all transactions, ensuring that, if someone spends his last digital dollar, he can't then spend it again. The ledger prevents fraud, but it also requires a trusted third party to administer it. Bitcoin did away with the third party by publicly distributing the ledger, what Nakamoto called the blockchain. Users willing to devote CPU power to running a special piece of software would be called miners and would form a network to maintain the blockchain collectively. In the process, they would also generate new currency. Transactions would be broadcast to the network, and computers running the software would compete to solve irreversible cryptographic puzzles that contain data from several transactions. The first miner to solve each puzzle would be awarded 50 new bitcoins, and the associated block of transactions would be added to the chain. The difficulty of each puzzle would increase as the number of miners increased, which would keep production to one block of transactions roughly every 10 minutes. In addition, the size of each block bounty would have every 210,000 blocks, first from 50 bitcoins to 25, then from 25 to 12.5, and so on. Around the year 2140, the currency would reach its preordained limit of 21 million bitcoins. When Nakamoto's paper came out in 2008, trust in the ability of governments and banks to manage the economy and the money supply was at its nadir. The U.S. government was throwing dollars at Wall Street and the Detroit car companies. The Federal Reserve was introducing quantitative easing, essentially printing money in order to stimulate the economy. The price of gold was rising. Bitcoin required no faith in the politicians or financiers who had wrecked the economy just in Nakamoto's elegant algorithms. Nakamoto himself mined the first 50 Bitcoin, which came to be called the Genesis block in January 3, 2009. For a year or so, his creation remained the province of a tiny group of early adopters. But slowly, word of Bitcoin spread beyond the insular world of cryptography. It has won accolades from some of digital currency's greatest minds. Wei Dai, inventor of B-Money, calls it very significant. Nick Szabo, who created BitGold, hails Bitcoin as a great contribution to the world. And Hal Finney, the eminent cryptographer behind RPOW, says it's potentially world-changing. The small band of early Bitcoiners all shared the communitarian spirit of an open-source software project. Gavin Andresen, a coder in New England, bought 10,000 bitcoins for $50 and created a site called the Bitcoin Faucet, where he gave them away for the hell of it. Laszlo Hanieks, a Florida programmer, conducted what Bitcoiners think of as the first real-world Bitcoin transaction, paying 10,000 bitcoins to get 2 pizzas delivered from Papa John's. When they weren't busy mining, the faithful tried to solve the mystery of the man they called simply Satoshi. On a Bitcoin IRC channel, someone noted portentously that in Japanese Satoshi means wise. Someone else wondered whether the name might be a sly portmanteau of 4 tech companies: Samsung, Toshiba, NAK Amici, and MOT Orola. It seemed doubtful that Nakamoto was even Japanese. His English had the flawless, idiomatic ring of a native speaker. Perhaps, it was suggested, Nakamoto wasn't one man but a mysterious group with an inscrutable purpose, a team at Google, maybe, or the National Security Agency. I exchanged some emails with whoever Satoshi supposedly is, says Haniax, who was on Bitcoin's core developer team for a time. I always got the impression it almost wasn't a real person. I'd get replies maybe every 2 weeks, as if someone would check it once in a while. Bitcoin seems awfully well designed for one person to crank out. Nakamoto revealed little about himself, limiting his online utterances to technical discussion of his source code. On December 5, 2010, after Bitcoiners started to call for WikiLeaks to accept Bitcoin donations, the normally terse and all-business Nakamoto weighed in with uncharacteristic vehemence. "No, don't bring it on," he wrote in a post to the Bitcoin forum. "The project needs to grow gradually so the software can be strengthened along the way." Then, as unexpectedly as he had appeared, Nakamoto vanished. At 6:22 p.m. GMT on December 12, 7 days after his WikiLeaks plea, Nakamoto posted his final message to the Bitcoin forum, concerning some minutiae in the latest version of the software. His email responses became more erratic, then stopped altogether. Andreessen, who had taken over the role of lead developer, was now apparently one of just a few people with whom he was still communicating. Bitcoin enthusiasts are almost evangelists, Bruce Wagner says. They see the beauty of the technology. It's a huge movement. It's almost like a religion. On the forum, you'll see the spirit. It's not just me. It's what's for the betterment of Bitcoin. Over just a few months, Wagner became Bitcoin's chief proselytizer. He hosts the Bitcoin Show, a program on Only One TV in which he plugs the nascent currency and interviews notables from the Bitcoin world. He also runs a Bitcoin meetup group and is gearing up to host Bitcoin's first World Conference in August. "I got obsessed and didn't eat or sleep for 5 days," he says, recalling the moment he discovered Bitcoin. For a while, the market followed his optimism. Through 2009 and early 2010, Bitcoins had no value at all. Then, as the currency gained viral traction in summer 2010, rising demand for a limited supply caused the price on online exchanges to start moving. By early November, it surged to 36 cents. In February 2011, it rose again and achieved dollar parity. In the spring, catalyzed in part by a much-linked Forbes story, the price exploded. From early April to the end of May, the going rate for a Bitcoin rose from 86 cents to $8.89. Then, after Gawker published a story on June 1 about the currency's popularity among online drug dealers, it more than tripled in a week, soaring to about $27. The market value of all Bitcoins in circulation was approaching $130 million. The future of Bitcoin seemed to shimmer with possibility. Mark Sapes, an inventor building a fusion reactor in a Brooklyn loft, got an old ATM and began retrofitting it to dispense cash for Bitcoins. On the so-called secret internet, the black and gray market site Silk Road anointed the Bitcoin the coin of the realm. You could use Bitcoins to buy everything from purple haze pot to fentanyl lollipops. As the price rose and mining became more popular, an arms race commenced. Miners looking for horsepower supplemented their computers with more powerful graphics cards. Where the first miners had used their existing machines, the new wave bought racks of cheap computers with high-speed GPUs cooled by noisy fans. The boom gave rise to mining rig porn, as miners posted photos of their setups. Amid the euphoria, there were troubling signs. Real money was at stake now, and the dramatic price rise had attracted a different element speculators. U.S. Senator Charles Schumer held a press conference, appealing to the DEA and Justice Department to shut down Silk Road, which he called the most brazen attempt to peddle drugs online that we have ever seen, and describing Bitcoin as an online form of money laundering. Even the purest technology has to live in an impure world. By default, Bitcoin kept users' currency in a digital wallet on their desktop. Once they started to become valuable, a PC felt inadequate. A primitive and unregulated financial services industry began to develop. Flybynight Online, wallet services promised to safeguard digital assets. Users were now blindly entrusting increasing amounts of currency to third parties. Sure enough, disturbing events began to bedevil the Bitcoiners. In mid-June, someone calling himself Alan Vane reported that 25,000 Bitcoins, worth more than $500,000, had been stolen from his computer. About a week later, a hacker pulled off an attack on a Tokyo-based exchange site called MT. Gox, which handled 90% of all Bitcoin exchange transactions. The hacker simulated a massive sell-off, driving the exchange rate to zero. In the public's imagination, overnight the Bitcoin went from being the currency of tomorrow to a dystopian joke. More disasters followed. Poland-based Bytomet accidentally overwritten its entire wallet. By summer, the oldest wallet service, My Bitcoin, stopped responding to emails. Whoever was running, it had apparently gone AWOL with everyone's money. Wagner himself revealed that he had been keeping all 25,000 or so of his Bitcoins on My Bitcoin. And nobody had been as trusted as Nakamoto himself, who remained mysteriously silent as the world he created threatened to implode. Some Bitcoiners began to suspect that he was working for the CIA or Federal Reserve. Others worried that Bitcoin had been a Ponzi scheme, with Nakamoto its Bernie Madoff mining Bitcoins when they were worthless, then waiting for their value to rise. You could say it's following Gartner's hype cycle, London-based core developer Amir Taki says. By this theory, Bitcoin is clambering out of the trough of disillusionment, as people learn to value the infallible code and discard the human drama and wild fluctuations that surround it. Beyond the most hardcore users, skepticism has only increased. Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman wrote that the currency's tendency to fluctuate has encouraged hoarding. Stefan Brands, a digital currency pioneer, calls it clever, but believes it's fundamentally structured like a pyramid scheme that rewards early adopters. I think the big problems are ultimately the trust issues, he says. The signal in the noise suggests an academic with somewhat outdated programming training. Nakamoto's style of notation was popular in the late 80s and early 90s. But Garzik, a developer, says that the most dedicated Bitcoiners have stopped trying to hunt down Nakamoto. We really don't care, he says. It's not the individuals behind the code who matter, but the code itself. And while people have stolen and cheated and abandoned the Bitcoiners, the code has remained true.